Hello and welcome to today's video. So this time we're going to be taking a look at the books of C.S. Forester, in particular the Hornblower sequence of 11 books. Now, I've absolutely loved these all my life, and I'm very pleased to say that I've got all the British hardbacks as well as all the paperback first editions. So I think that's going to make quite an interesting video as we relay the story of the books and also Hornblower's life. So sit back, relax, and let's get to it. Okay then, so I think what we'll do, in the 1950s, Penguin published these really nice editions of Forester's works with these lovely illustrations on the front. On the back, they had a bit of a potted biography, so I'll just quickly read you a little bit about Forester himself. So C.S. Forester was born in Cairo in 1899, where his father was stationed as a government official. He studied medicine at Guy's Hospital, and after leaving Guy's without a degree, he turned to writing as a career. His first success was Payment Deferred, a novel written at the age of 24 and later dramatised and filmed with Charles Laughton in the leading role. In 1932, Forester was offered a Hollywood contract, and from then until 1939, he spent 13 weeks of every year in America. On the outbreak of war, he entered the Ministry of Information, and later he sailed with the Royal Navy to collect the material for the ship. He then made a voyage to the Bering Sea to gather material for a similar book on the United States Navy. It was here that he picked up a disease which left him crippled. However, he continued to write, and in Captain Hornblower he created the most renowned sailor in contemporary fiction. He now lives in California with his family and occasionally visits England. As I said, this was written a decade or two before he actually passed away in the late 1960s. But yeah, absolutely a fantastic author. Definitely most famous for the Hornblower series, of which this is the first one. But he did also write other books, as I said, The Ship, The Gun, Payment Deferred was another one, The General. Another famous one was The African Queen, a famous Humphrey Bogart movie, of which I used to have a first of that one, in actual fact, one I picked up in the early 90s over in New Zealand, but sadly traded that one along with other books back in the day, But we'll open. I think the best way to do this is we'll nip through the books chronologically as they were published, but I think that's the best way to see sort of how the series progressed, and then we'll go back and we'll look at the series as it's supposed to be read, sort of in the career of Hornblower from joining the Navy right up until becoming the Lord of the Admiralty. So I think that's probably the best way to do it. So the first book to actually be published was this one, which was called The Happy Return. Now in America, this was actually released as Beat to Quarters, and it appeared in 1937. The American name for this is derived from the expression beat to quarters, which was the signal to prepare for combat. And this is actually, if you look at it chronologically in Hornblower's life, it's actually like the sixth book to be read in sequence. So what I'll do, I won't dwell on that. I'll just go through these in order, then we'll have a look at them in the order that they should be read. But yeah, this was the very first one. Now, copies of these early books are very, very scarce. So I have I've had them in my collection for quite some time. Here we are, 1937. But it's actually in a facsimile dust wrapper. And I got these from a dust wrapper company in San Francisco, I believe. There we are. They're all their dust wrappers are marked. So LLC, to distinguish it from an original, and it fits the book perfectly, so I'm really, really happy with that one. And this one also was released as a Penguin, The Happy Return, Penguin number 835, and this one came out in 1951. So that's the first book there, The Happy Return. Okay, so book number 2 is A Ship of the Line. So a slight variance in cover. So A Ship of the Line was published the very next year in 1938. And once again, my copy of the first edition, it's an original, but it's in a facsimile dust wrapper here. But I certainly don't mind that because, I said, these are so expensive. Really, really nice Penguin edition here. I believe the covers are by, is it John Jakes? I think is the chap who does all these like little miniature like vignettes on the front. I'm sure that's his name. Robin Jakes. The illustration on the cover has been specifically drawn for this edition by Robin Jakes. Now, this particular one here was one of 10 books that Penguin released all at the same time, and of Forrester's books. Some of them were his crime ones as well. And on the inside cover here, it does list the other books in the series. So there's some more Hornblower ones, and then 6 other books, they say based on the Peninsular War. A bit of a Foxdale copy, this one. But this is a period in Penguin history that I absolutely love. There's some great authors published during this time. George Orwell, John Wyndham, C.S. Forester. The list goes on and on. It's just fantastic. Very much one of my favourite periods of Penguin, this. So that's A Ship of the Line, and that was the second book written in the series. Now the next one was Flying Colours. Now, Flying Colours, when it first appeared, it came sort of out in this omnibus edition, which Flying Colours, including the previous book, A Ship of the Line. Then about a month later, after this was published, came the standalone first edition of Flying Colours. And that standalone edition is very, very expensive. Why it got released as an omnibus first, I really don't know, but I'm very pleased to say this is somewhat more affordable. Once again, this is also in a facsimile dust wrapper, which is why it looks so lovely. But it's because it's got 2 books in there. It's actually a real big thick tome, but certainly not something that I mind at all. And 1938 again, and this sort of completes the original sort of pre-war trilogy. That's the hardback, and here is the Penguin paperback edition, published as part of that 10 of Flying Colours as well. Okay, so that's the first sort of three books in the series, and then of course along came the war, which did muck things up a little bit for Forrester and everybody else. Okay, so book number 4 was The Commodore, and this one is. I am on the lookout for, this is in its original dust wrapper, but I am on the lookout for a better copy of this one because the spine has faded. It should be that nice orange colour, and you can see mine's faded down to the yellow. It still doesn't look too bad. This is also in like quite a poor dust wrapper sleeve, so it's one on my list to upgrade, that's for sure, but it certainly wasn't expensive. And this one came out right at the tail end of the war, 1945, and it was this particular book. Here's the Penguin edition now, that I remember when I was reading Winston Churchill's history of the Second World War. Churchill was coming back from America, and he'd been sent a copy of the Commodore, and he was really over the moon because he was such a huge fan of the Hornblower books, and he actually mentions it in his memoirs that he read on the way back, the new Hornblower book, and was over the moon to have that one early. So that's the Commodore. And then the next one, once again, quite jumping on a bit in Hornblower's career, so certainly not chronological, was Lord Hornblower. And in fact, Penguin themselves didn't get round to publishing this one until quite a bit later. Back in, it was 1964 before this one was published. But this is the next one historically, and this one was written, or published rather, in 1946. It was the very next year. After the Commodore came Lord Hornblower. You've got to say the dust jackets aren't knockout. They're certainly not the best in the world by any means, but the stories are so good underneath that I think they're just fantastic. I absolutely love them, but they are fairly, because of their age, they are fairly difficult to get hold of. Now, after Lord Hornblower comes, the titles that become. He was persuaded, basically. It was a few more years, and then he was eventually persuaded, I guess, by his publishers, look, you've got to go back and write some more Hornblower books. So he decided to go all the way back to the start of Hornblower's career, rather, and Forster took him to when he first first joined the Navy as a midshipman. And these are the ones that perhaps most people are familiar with, because these have been adapted the most, and also they were the basis for the TV series, followed this story right through. So this is Mr. Midshipman Hornblower, and here's the Penguin paperback edition of Mr. Midshipman Hornblower, a very young Hornblower there. Walking the mainsail there, you might remember that scene if you read the books. And also the style of cover changes now. These ones by Bureau. I think these are a little bit more fetching. Here he is, Lieutenant Hornblower. So that was Mr. Midshipman, and this is when he gets promoted to lieutenant, which is this one here. It's again a nice, distinctive, but straightforward jacket for sure. And then this one actually had its first publication as a pan. So thankfully I collect pans and penguins. And this one, certainly the cover looks like Michael Redgrave, because by now Hornblower, it had already had a radio series in America called Beat to Quarters. But the first Hornblower movie had been filmed with Michael Redgrave, and they also did a 1 hour radio dramatization of that one as well. And certainly that looks like him on the front there. And this was 1957. And Lieutenant Hornblower was published in 1952 in hardback. And I believe this was a real bestseller, and it's one of the best ones in the series. So I think you'll enjoy that one. Now, the next one, we then get on to the slightly less well-known tail-end ones. So we've got Hornblower and the Atropos. It's that one there. And the paperback adaptation, once again, is from Pan Books. And it was one of their sort of later ones, so it's not part of their like giant series or anything like that. It is just a normal sort of pan title. Not the greatest of covers. They're quite difficult to get in first edition, which is why my copy's quite a bit worn. But I'm just glad to have one more than anything. The hardback, yep, lovely book here. Bureau dust jacket again. And this was 1953. Hornblower and the Atropos. So the next book in the series is Hornblower in the West Indies. Lovely jacket there by Bureau. And this one also had a nice pan edition by Taylor. Very nice pair, that one. Hornblower in the West Indies. He is on the back. And each book generally gives like a little bibliography. So he was quite a prolific author, wasn't he? And as well as all his novels, he also wrote lots for the pulps and digests of the period as well. So if you collect C.S. Forester as an author, there's a lot to get your teeth stuck into. So that was Hornblower in the West Indies. Then there was 2 more novels that he wrote. Next one is Hornblower and the Hotspur. Now once again, this is not one that many people know about, but it's all part of the series. This is the Penguin edition, which didn't come out until, once again, the mid-60s. So Penguin had the rights to this one. It is weird that they were published by different companies, but at the time, Pan and Penguin, there was a few authors who were published in both. Pan had a few Agatha Christie's, and then Penguin had a load as well. There was all sorts of like crossovers going on. Then the very last one to be published was this one, which was Hornblower and the Crisis. Now, this was sadly not finished before Forester himself passed away. So at the end of the book, they do tend to they have a little just a summary of what could have happened. Now, in actual fact, the various people have actually decided to do their own. Yeah, this is the last encounter. This is sort of summarising the end of the book. But what some people have done, they've actually tried to complete this novel themselves in the style of Forester. I've not read any of these, but apparently there are some good efforts out there. And that one, Hornblower and the Crisis, did also have another similar sort of pan later paperback, like early 70s, I believe, these late 60s, early 70s, in 1970, this one. So the hardback was 1967 and the paperback came in 1970. And that completes the actual set. Forster himself did create a thing called the Hornblower Companion, which sort of attempts to chronicle Hornblower's life. But there was this one, which is highly regarded. It's by C. Northcote Parkinson, and that's the life and times of Horatio Hornblower. And this is a bit more detailed. Also published as a Penguin. And after Forster died, Northcote Parkinson was able to literally put it all together chronologically. He also ties in what was perhaps based on actual figures in history, of which there was quite a bit, as you can imagine, and it is quite a sort of an essential companion to the series. So that's all the first edition hardbacks and the first edition paperbacks. We'll now go through and I'll show you which order to read them in, and also a quick synopsis of what happens in each story. Okay, so I would certainly suggest, if you do fancy reading these, that you read them in chronological order in Hornblower's life. So you start with this one, Mr. Midshipman Hornblower, and this story then sets off the whole series. So here we meet Horatio Hornblower, a young man of 17, and in this volume 1 of what will become an 11-volume set about the career of this British naval officer fighting against Napoleon and his tyranny of Europe as an inexperienced midshipman in January 1794. Bullied and forced into a duel, he takes an even chance, and then he has many more chances to show his skills and ingenuities, from sailing a ship full of wetted and swelling rice to imprisonment and saving the lives of shipwrecked sailors. And, along the way, he fights galleys, feeds cattle, stays out of the way of the guillotine, and makes friends with the Duchess. Here, Hornblower becomes a man and develops the strength of character which will make him a hero to his men and to all England. So there we are. That's the very, very first book, and certainly a great book it is. So that's Mr. Midshipman Hornblower. So the second book is Lieutenant Hornblower. So in this gripping tale of turmoil and triumph on the high seas, Horatio Hornblower emerges from his apprenticeship as a midshipman to face new responsibilities thrust upon him by the fortunes of war between Napoleon and Spain. Enduring near mutiny, bloody hand-to-hand combat with Spanish seamen, deck splintering sea battles, and the violence and horror of life on the fighting ships of the Napoleonic Wars, the young lieutenant distinguishes himself in his first independent command. He also faces an adventure unique in his experience, Maria. And there we are. That's a tantalising glimpse at what the second book consists of. Certainly one of my favourites. I do love them all, don't get me wrong. But these early ones where Forrester went back to cover Hornblower's early life, it's just fantastic. So the next one we've got is Hornblower and the Hotspur. Really like that run of jackets there by Penguin. So in Hornblower and the Hotspur, it's April 1803. The peace of the Amiens is breaking down. Napoleon is building ships and amassing an army just across the Channel. Horatio Hornblower, who at age 27 has already distinguished himself as one of the most daring and resourceful officers in the Royal Navy, commands the three-masted Hotspur on a dangerous reconnaissance mission that involves, as war breaks out, into a series of spectacular confrontations. All the while, the introspective young commander struggles to understand his new bride and mother-in-law, his officers and crew, and his own accursed unhappy temperament, matters that trouble him more perhaps than any of Bonaparte's cannibals. So there we are, quite an interesting one, that one, Hornblower and the Hotspur. So book 4 in the sequence is Hornblower and the Crisis. This was published as a later Pam book. So this was, of course, the final Hornblower book ever written. So it says, the final Horatio Hornblower story tells of Napoleon's plans to invade England. Set in 1805, Hornblower and the Crisis finds Horatio Hornblower in possession of confidential dispatches from Bonaparte after a vicious hand-to-hand encounter with a French brig. The Admiralty rewards Hornblower by sending him on a dangerous espionage mission that will light the powder trail leading to the Battle of Trafalgar. Hornblower and the Crisis was unfinished at the time of Forrester's death, but the author left notes, included here, telling us how the tale would end. Also included are 2 further stories, Hornblower and the Widow McCall and The Last Encounter, that tell of Hornblower as a very young and a very old man, respectively. This is the final book chronicling the adventures of C.S. Forrester's imitable nautical hero, Horatio Hornblower. Yes, what a shame that he didn't end up writing a book a year, but that is the last one that was ever written, but not the last one chronologically, because we then jump to this one, which is Hornblower and the Atropos. So in the wake of a humbling incident aboard a canal boat in the Cotswolds, young Captain Horatio Hornblower arrives in London to take command of the Atropos, a 22-gun sloop barely large enough to require a captain. Her first assignment under Hornblower's command is as flagship for the funeral procession of Lord Nelson. Soon Atropos is part of the Mediterranean fleet's harassment of Napoleon, recovering treasure that lies deep in Turkish waters and boldly challenging a Spanish frigate several times her size. At the centre of each adventure is Hornblower, Forster's most inspired creation, whose blend of cautious preparation and spirited execution dazzles friend and foe alike. Now we're on to The Happy Return, which Penguin felt the need to put underneath a Hornblower story, just in case readers didn't know. So it's June 1808. Somewhere west of Nicaragua, a site suitable for spectacular sea battles, the Admiralty has ordered Captain Horatio Hornblower, now in command of the 36-gun HMS Lydia, to form an alliance against the Spanish colonial government with an insane Spanish landowner to find a water route across the Central American Isthmus and to take, sink, burn or destroy the 50-gun Spanish ship of the line Natividad, or face court-martial. A daunting enough set of orders, even if the happily married captain were not woefully distracted by the passenger he is obliged to take on into Panama, Lady Barbara Wellesley. Okay, so that is like a recurring scene with this woman, and she does run throughout the books. Next, another real favourite, which is A Ship of the Line. So, May 1810. 17 years deep into the Napoleonic Wars, Captain Horatio Hornblower is newly in command of his first ship of the line, the 74-gun HMS Sutherland, which he deems the ugliest and least desirable two-decker in the Navy list. Moreover, she is 250 men short of a full crew, so Hornblower must enlist and train poachers, bigamists, sheep stealers, and other landlubbers. By the time the Sutherland reaches the blockaded Catalonian coast of Spain, the crew is capable of staging 5 astonishing solo raids against the French. But the grisly prospect of defeat and capture looms for both captain and crew as the Sutherland single-handedly takes on 4 French ships. Fantastic, eh? Really, really good one, that. Full of excitement. Just superb stuff. Next we have Flying Colours. I'll pop that one over there. So forced to surrender his ship, the Sutherland, after a long and bloody battle, Captain Horatio Hornblower now bides his time as a prisoner in a French fortress. Within days, he and his first lieutenant Bush, who was crippled in the last fight, are to be taken to Paris to be tried on trumped-up charges of violating the laws of war, and most probably executed as part of Napoleon's attempt to rally the war-weary empire behind him. Even if Hornblower escapes this fate and somehow finds his way back to England, he will face court-martial for his surrender of a British ship. As fear for his life and his reputation compete in his mind with worries about his pregnant wife and his possibly widowed lover, the indomitable captain impatiently awaits the chance to make his next move. Fantastic, eh? Now, if you've not got time to read all the books, then the adaptation in the early 2000s with Ione Guffield in the title role. Fantastic, absolutely fantastic. A lot of them filmed very, very near where I live in Plymouth, quite a naval port. So it filmed in what they call Royal William Yard, which is actually the scene of some of the actual Royal Navy incidents in actual history. So the Commodore, it's 1812. And the fate of Europe lies in the hands of the newly appointed Commodore Hornblower. Dispatched to northern waters, Hornblower will protect Britain's Baltic interests and halt the advance of Napoleon's empire into Sweden and Russia. First, he must battle the terrible Baltic weather, fog, snow, and ice-bound waterways, overcome Russian political and commercial intrigues, avoid the seductive charms of royalty, as well as the deadly reach of assassins in the imperial palace, and contend with hostile armies and French privateers. With the fate of Europe balanced on a knife edge, the responsibility lies heavy on a Commodore's shoulders. There we are. Perhaps not one of the more well-known of the Hornblower stories, but still very, very good. Next we've got Lord Hornblower. Pop him there. So weary of the war that has waged nearly his entire life, Hornblower finds himself assigned an especially dangerous and dubious new task: to rescue a man he knows to be a tyrant from the mutiny of his crew in the Bay of the Seine. This risky adventure, coinciding with reports that the tide of war may be turning as Wellington has swept over the Pyrenees and the Russians have reached the Rhine, propels Hornblower towards the heart of the French Empire, toward a fateful reunion with old friends, and toward the harrowing but glorious conclusion of his own battle with Napoleon. And then the very last book, chronologically, was this lovely pan edition of Hornblower in the West Indies. Horatio Hornblower, now an admiral, sails overseas as challenging as any in his victorious career. As admiral in charge of His Britannic Majesty's West Indies station, he is as gallant, daring, implosive as ever. In this tense time after Napoleon's defeat, all kinds of vagabonds, revolutionaries, imperial guards and pirates come sailing into the waters where Hornblower is working his small contingent of naval vessels to preserve the peace and eliminate piracy. With intrepid daring and brilliant strategies, Hornblower wins his victories. With this series of adventures, Volume 11, Hornblower's professional life as a British naval officer reaches its climax, not in a battle against men, but against nature. Here, the inner Hornblower shows his true colours. And there we are, fantastic stuff, eh? So that's the whole sequence, and that's the order that really you should read them. And then if you do want extra information, there is always the Hornblower Life and Times of Horatio Hornblower. Now, the books have never been out of print, and there is a rather snazzy little box set you can get. If you do want a slightly older box set, I can recommend this one, which Penguin put out in the 1970s. It's this one here. It doesn't have all the books, unfortunately, but it is quite a nice little set, and it's got that really glorious artwork. So that's quite a nice little one that you might want to get your hands on. So anyway, there we go. So that is our look at the books of C.S. Forester's Hornblower sequence, and I think you will very much enjoy going into those. They are fantastic. And if you do need to, if you've not got time to read all the books, but you do want to see them adapted, certainly the Ian Guffield ITV Australian co-production is definitely worth it, although they do only cover the first four books in Hornblower's career. They don't do the whole lot, which I don't believe has ever been done. Bits and pieces of it have been done, and you can sort of piece it all together between TV and radio adaptations, but the whole books, all the books haven't been dramatised at all, which is a shame. And I really hope that maybe Ian Guffield can come back and do the later stories, because I'm sure they'd be fantastic, now that he's of course a bit older as well. Anyway, that's it for today. I do hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please give it a thumbs up, and do please consider subscribing to the channel for regular content such as this, and I shall look forward to seeing you again very soon. Bye.